Marcus Bennett's phone vibrated for the fifth time in an hour, each buzz a small betrayal of the quiet he'd carved out in his corner office. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting that familiar corporate pallor across rows of monitors displaying streams of data only he seemed to understand anymore. His fingers paused over the keyboard, hovering above code that would automate another chunk of his department's workload, making him simultaneously indispensable and invisible. The phone lit up again. Mom. Always Mom. He didn't need to read the message to know what it said. 3 years of the same conversation, the same gentle, then not so gentle pressure, the same ultimatums dressed up as maternal concern. Tonight was the night. The blind date. The one he'd agreed to in a moment of weakness last Tuesday when his mother had shown up at his apartment with groceries. And that look. The one that said she was trying to hold together the pieces of a family that had shattered on a rainy October morning when a drunk driver had run a red light and taken Sarah away from them forever. The data on his screen blurred. Marcus blinked hard, forcing his eyes back to the present, to the algorithm that didn't care about grief or loneliness, or the way a 6-year-old boy still sometimes called out for his mother in the middle of the night. Work was clean. Work had answers. Work didn't ask him when he was going to move on, as if moving on were a destination you could map on GPS, instead of a journey through quicksand, where every step forward felt like a betrayal of everything he'd lost. His desk phone rang. Internal extension. He considered not answering, but discipline won out over desire. The voice on the other end belonged to Jennifer from HR, bright and relentlessly cheerful. She needed the quarterly analytics report by tomorrow morning instead of Friday. Marcus made a non-committal sound that she took for agreement and hung up before she could pivot to asking about his weekend plans. Everyone in the office had stopped asking about his personal life about 18 months ago, which suited him fine. He was the guy who came in early, left late, and never attended happy hours. The reliable one. The tragic one. The one people felt sorry for in a way that made them uncomfortable, so they learned to look past him like furniture. The afternoon crawled forward. Marcus finished the report Jennifer wanted, then started on next week's projections because sitting still meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering the sound of metal crumpling, glass shattering, the phone call that had split his life into before and after. He'd been at work that day too, staying late to finish a project that hadn't mattered at all in the end. Sarah had been picking up Isaiah from daycare. The other driver had walked away with a broken arm and a DUI. Sarah had died before the ambulance arrived. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Mrs. Diane Porter, the woman who'd been his mother's friend for 30 years and Sarah's confidant before that. The message was short. Don't you dare cancel. Julia is a good person. She deserves a chance. So do you. Marcus stared at the words until they stopped making sense. Just black pixels on a bright screen. He wanted to type back that Julia, whoever she was, deserved better than a charity case, better than a man who still wore his wedding ring and kept his wife's coffee mug on his desk like a monument to everything he'd failed to protect. But Mrs. Porter had deployed the nuclear option last week, the one piece of emotional blackmail he couldn't deflect. If he didn't show up to this date, she'd tell his mother, and his mother would stop watching Isaiah on weekends. Not out of cruelty, but out of broken-hearted determination to force him back into the land of the living. He typed back, I'll be there. The clock on his computer read 4:47 p.m. The coffee shop was across town, the meeting set for 6:30. That gave him time to go home, shower, change into something that didn't scream, I haven't cared about my appearance in 3 years, and have the awkward conversation with Isaiah about where Daddy was going tonight. The thought of that conversation made his stomach clench. Isaiah had gotten better at not asking when Mom was coming home, but the questions had evolved into something harder. Why didn't Dad have friends like other dads? Why didn't they go places? Why did Grandma always look sad when she thought no one was watching? Marcus saved his work, shut down his monitors in sequence, and grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair. The office had emptied out already, most people eager to start their Friday nights, to meet friends at bars or go home to partners who'd ask about their day and actually listen to the answer. The elevator descended in silence, and Marcus caught his reflection in the polished steel doors. 35 years old, looking 40. The grief had carved lines around his eyes, hollowed out his cheeks just enough to make him look perpetually tired. He'd lost weight in the first year, then gained it back, plus 10 pounds of the wrong kind, stress weight that settled around his middle and made his dress shirts fit wrong. The parking garage smelled like oil and exhaust. His car, a sensible sedan that Sarah had picked out because it had the highest safety ratings, sat in its assigned spot. He slid behind the wheel and sat for a moment in the gathering darkness, hands on the steering wheel, not ready to turn the key and begin the sequence of events that would lead him to that coffee shop and the woman who was probably just as reluctant to be there as he was. His phone rang, not a buzz this time, but the actual ringtone, which meant it was on the short list of people he'd allowed through his Do Not Disturb settings. Isaiah's face filled the screen, a photo from last summer at the beach, gap-toothed and grinning, completely unaware that 3 months later he'd have an asthma attack that would land him in the ER and remind Marcus that loss could come from anywhere, anytime, without warning. He answered. Isaiah's voice came through small and excited. "Dad, Grandma says you're going to meet a pretty lady tonight. Is she going to be my new mom?" The question landed like a punch. Marcus closed his eyes, pressed his forehead against the steering wheel. "No, buddy. It's just dinner, just talking to someone. But Grandma says a lot of things. I'll be home later, okay? Be good." "I'm always good." The pure confidence in that statement made Marcus smile despite everything. "You are. You're the best. I love you." "Love you too, Dad. Good luck with the pretty lady." The call ended. Marcus sat in the silence of the garage, the weight of his son's hope pressing down on him like a physical thing. Isaiah deserved better than this, deserved a full family, deserved a mother who could show up to school plays and pack lunches with little notes inside, and do all the things that Marcus tried to do, but couldn't quite get right, because he was one person trying to be two and failing at both. He started the car. Traffic was light for a Friday, which meant he arrived home with too much time to overthink. The apartment building looked the same as always. Brown brick and generic landscaping, the kind of place that sheltered young professionals and small families in transit between better things. Marcus and Sarah had moved in planning to stay 2 years, save up for a house with a yard. They'd been there 5 years when she died. He'd stayed because moving meant packing up her things, deciding what to keep and what to donate, and he hadn't been ready for that. Still wasn't. Isaiah met him at the door, already in his dinosaur pajamas, even though it was barely past 5. His grandmother sat on the couch, knitting something pink and complicated. She looked up as Marcus entered, her expression carefully neutral. "You're cutting it close." "I have time." Marcus loosened his tie, headed toward the bedroom. Isaiah followed like a shadow, bouncing with that endless 6-year-old energy that Marcus envied and struggled to match after a full day at work. "What are you going to wear? Are you going to bring her flowers?" Tommy's dad brought his mom flowers on their date, and now they're getting married again. Marcus paused at his closet door. "Again?" "They got divorced, but then they went on dates and fell back in love, and now Tommy's getting a little sister." The simplicity of it, the way Isaiah saw the world as a place where broken things could be fixed and people who left could come back, made Marcus's chest ache. He pulled out a blue button-down that Sarah had bought him for their last anniversary, then put it back. Not that one. Not tonight. He settled on something gray and unremarkable, the kind of shirt that wouldn't make any kind of statement at all. Isaiah sat on the bed, swinging his legs. "Are you nervous?" "A little." "You don't gotta be. You're really nice and smart, and Grandma says any lady would be lucky to have you." Marcus turned to look at his son, Really look at him, seeing echoes of Sarah in the curve of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. Thanks, buddy. That means a lot. Are you gonna kiss her? What? No. Isaiah, this is just coffee. Just talking. But if you like her, we'll see. Now go finish your dinner. I need to get ready. Isaiah slid off the bed, but paused at the door. Dad, it's okay if you like her. Mom wouldn't be mad. The words hit Marcus like cold water. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried to find something to say that wasn't a lie, but wouldn't crush the hope in his son's voice. Before he could respond, Isaiah was gone, padding back down the hallway toward the living room and his grandmother, and the simple world where love was easy and loss was temporary. Marcus showered quickly, the hot water doing nothing to ease the tension in his shoulders. He shaved, nicking himself twice because his hands weren't steady. In the mirror, a stranger looked back. Someone who was trying too hard to look like he wasn't trying at all. He thought about Sarah, about the way she'd always been able to read him, to know when he was nervous or excited or faking his way through something he didn't understand. She'd have laughed at him right now, would have straightened his collar and told him to stop overthinking and just be himself. But himself was broken. Himself was a man who'd spent 3 years building walls so high that the idea of letting someone in felt like planning his own demolition. He emerged from the bedroom at 6:15. His mother had moved to the kitchen, was washing Isaiah's dinner dishes with the methodical efficiency of someone who'd raised 4 children and knew how to make order out of chaos. She glanced at him, nodded once. You look nice. Thanks. Julia is a good person, Marcus. Whatever Mrs. Porter told you about her, it's true. Mrs. Porter didn't tell me anything except the time and place. His mother's hands stilled in the soapy water. She didn't tell you? Something in her voice made the hair on the back of Marcus's neck stand up. Tell me what? Nothing. Never mind. Just give her a chance. That's all I'm asking. Marcus wanted to press, but Isaiah had appeared again, holding up a drawing he'd made at school. Look, Dad, it's you and me and a lady. The stick figures were rendered in crayon, 3 people holding hands under a yellow sun. The lady had long hair and a smile. Marcus took the picture, careful not to crumple it, his throat tight. It's great, buddy. Really great. You can give it to her. Girls like pictures. I'll keep it safe. Marcus tucked the drawing into his jacket pocket, then knelt down to hug his son, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and childhood innocence. Be good for Grandma, okay? I'll see you later. Bring her home so I can meet her. Isaiah, please? Marcus looked up at his mother, who had the grace to look slightly guilty for whatever she'd set in motion. We'll see. Now go play. Isaiah ran off, already distracted by something on TV. Marcus stood, adjusted his jacket, checked his phone. 6:22. The coffee shop was 15 minutes away if traffic cooperated. He should leave. He should have left 5 minutes ago. He should cancel, should text some excuse about work or Isaiah or a sudden illness, anything to avoid walking into whatever trap his well-meaning family had constructed. His mother dried her hands on a towel, then walked over and adjusted his collar, even though it didn't need adjusting. Marcus, I know you're scared, but Sarah would want this. She would want you to be happy. You don't know that. Yes, I do. She told me. 2 weeks before she died, she made me promise that if anything ever happened to her, I'd make sure you didn't spend the rest of your life alone. His mother's eyes were wet, but her voice stayed steady. So I'm keeping that promise. Now go. Marcus left before he could think of a reason not to. The drive passed in a blur of street lights and stop signs, his mind replaying his mother's words, trying to remember if Sarah had seemed different in those last weeks, if she'd had some premonition of the accident that would take her, But no, she'd been normal, happy, planning Isaiah's 4th birthday party, talking about maybe trying for a second child, living like someone who expected to have a future. The coffee shop appeared on his right, a trendy place with exposed brick and too many potted plants. Marcus circled the block twice before finding parking, then sat in his car for 3 full minutes, watching people come and go through the front windows. Young couples, mostly. Friends catching up. No one who looked like they were on a blind date arranged by meddling relatives. His phone showed 6:31. He was late. Good, maybe she'd already left. Maybe this was the universe giving him an out. He got out of the car anyway. The coffee shop smelled like espresso and cinnamon, warm and inviting in a way that made Marcus feel even more out of place. He scanned the room, looking for a woman sitting alone, looking uncomfortable, looking like she'd been set up just like him. There were 3 possibilities. He ruled out the teenager with the laptop and the elderly woman with the book. That left the corner table. Marcus stopped walking. The woman sitting there was young, maybe late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that had started to come loose. She wore an oversized gray sweater that looked comfortable but expensive. She was staring down at her phone, one hand resting on the table, the other tucked against her body in a way that seemed protective. Her face was tired but striking, the kind of bone structure that would have made her beautiful if she didn't look so utterly exhausted. And she was very, very pregnant. Not early pregnancy, not the kind you might miss if you weren't paying attention. This was 7 months, maybe more, the kind of pregnant where there was no hiding it, no pretending it away. The sweater did nothing to disguise the swell of her belly, and as Marcus stood frozen in the doorway, she shifted in her seat with the careful movement of someone carrying extra weight in places that made everything harder. This had to be wrong. This had to be the wrong table, the wrong woman, some cosmic mistake. Mrs. Porter wouldn't have. His mother wouldn't have. The woman looked up. Her eyes met his across the crowded shop, and something in her expression said she knew exactly who he was, had been waiting for exactly this reaction. She stood slowly, using the table for leverage, and Marcus watched her face arrange itself into something between resignation and defiance. She was walking toward him. No, not walking, moving through the crowd with the determination of someone who decided to get this over with one way or another. Marcus's feet felt welded to the floor. His mind was screaming at him to leave, to turn around and walk back to his car and drive home and tell his mother this was too much. She'd gone too far this time. But he didn't move. The woman stopped in front of him, close enough that he could see the faint shadows under her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly before she clasped them together. When she spoke, her voice was steady but tight, like she was holding on to her composure by force of will alone. "You're Marcus, right? I'm Julia. Your date." The word date hung in the air between them, ridiculous and sad and somehow accurate all at once. Marcus opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His brain had short-circuited somewhere between pregnant and blind date and couldn't seem to reboot. Julia's jaw tightened. She lifted her chin slightly, a gesture that screamed defensive pride. "I know what you're thinking. You can leave. Most guys do." The bluntness of it, the way she said it like she'd given this speech before, snapped Marcus out of his paralysis. He looked at her. Really looked. Past the pregnancy and the exhaustion to something harder to name. Strength, maybe. Or stubbornness. The kind of quality Sarah used to have. The refusal to apologize for existing in a world that didn't make space for her. He thought about turning around. Thought about the drawing in his pocket, Isaiah's stick figures holding hands. Thought about his mother's voice. "She deserves a chance." Marcus gestured toward the corner table. "Should we sit?" Something flickered across Julia's face. Surprise, definitely, Relief, maybe. She nodded once, then turned and walked back to the table. That careful, pregnant woman gait that made her seem both vulnerable and indestructible at the same time.
Marcus followed, his heart pounding for reasons he couldn't quite articulate. They sat. The table was small, intimate in a way that felt wrong for whatever this was. Julia's water glass was half empty, condensation pooling on the wooden surface. She wrapped both hands around it, but didn't drink. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The coffee shop noise swirled around them, conversations and laughter and the hiss of the espresso machine. Normal people having normal Friday nights. Marcus focused on a scratch in the table's surface, tracing it with his eyes, anywhere to avoid looking at the woman across from him and the situation that made no sense. Julia broke the silence first. "My aunt arranged this. Mrs. Porter. She and your mother are friends from some volunteer group. Book club, maybe, I don't know." She paused, took a shaky breath. "She didn't tell you I was pregnant, did she?" "No."
"Didn't tell me you didn't know either." Julia's laugh was bitter and short.
Classic Aunt Diane. Meddle first, ask questions never.
"Why would she—" Marcus stopped, reformulated. "Why would she think this was a good idea?" Because apparently the best way to fix the scandal of me being pregnant and unmarried is to throw me at a respectable man and pray something sticks. Julia's voice had gone flat, rehearsed, like she was reading from a script she'd memorized against her will. "My family gave me a choice. Show up to these dates Aunt Diane sets up, or deal with them cutting me off completely. Financial support, health insurance, all of it." Marcus felt anger spark in his chest, hot and unexpected. "That's not a choice." "No, it's not." Julia met his eyes, and he saw the same anger there, buried under layers of exhaustion and something that looked like shame.
"I'm guessing you got a similar ultimatum?" He thought about his mother's promise to Sarah, about Isaiah asking if the pretty lady would be his new mom, about 3 years of gentle and not so gentle pressure to move on, to date, to pretend he was capable of building something new on the ruins of everything he'd lost. Something like that. "So we're both here under duress." Julia picked at a napkin, shredding it into small pieces. "That's a great foundation for whatever this is supposed to be." "What is this supposed to be?" "Hell if I know. My aunt keeps talking about giving me a fresh start, finding someone who'll overlook my situation, like I'm damaged goods on clearance." The bitterness in her voice could have stripped paint. "Your mom probably sold it differently. Told you I'm a nice girl who made a mistake and deserves a second chance." Marcus wanted to argue, but the description was uncomfortably accurate. His mother had used almost those exact words last week. He leaned back in his chair, studying Julia with new eyes. She wasn't what he'd expected. Wasn't the desperate woman looking for rescue that his imagination had conjured. She was angry, cornered, fighting. He recognized the look. "For what it's worth," Marcus said slowly, "I didn't want to be here either." Julia's hand stilled on the napkin. "Then why did you come?" "Because my mother threatened to stop watching my son if I didn't. And because she promised my wife, before she died, that she'd make sure I didn't spend the rest of my life alone." The words came out harder than he intended. Apparently grief has an expiration date. Julia's expression shifted, softened just slightly. "I'm sorry. About your wife." "Don't be." Marcus caught himself, took a breath. "Sorry, that came out wrong. I just mean, I'm tired of people being sorry. It doesn't change anything." "No, it doesn't." Julia abandoned the napkin, folded her hands on the table. No ring, no tan line, just bare fingers with short, practical nails. "How old is your son?" "6, Isaiah. He has asthma, had a scare a few months back that landed us in the ER. He's fine now, but—" Marcus trailed off, not sure how to explain the lingering fear,
the way he still checked on Isaiah 3 times a night to make sure he was breathing. But you're terrified something else will go wrong. Yeah. Julia nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. Her hand drifted to her belly, that unconscious protective gesture Marcus had seen pregnant women make 1,000 times. He'd watched Sarah do the same thing when she carried Isaiah, before everything went wrong in ways neither of them could have predicted. A waitress appeared beside their table, young and perky and blissfully unaware of the tension. What can I get you, folks? Just coffee, black. Marcus didn't care about coffee, but needed something to do with his hands. Decaf latte, please, Julia added. Extra foam.
The waitress bounced away. Silence descended again, heavier this time. Marcus watched Julia, watched her watching him. Both of them trapped in this moment neither had asked for, trying to figure out how to get through it with their dignity intact. Julia spoke first, her voice quieter now. How far along are you? In the grief, I mean, if that's not too personal.
3 years. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago.
Does it get easier?
The question was so raw, so honest, that Marcus forgot for a moment that they were talking about his loss, not hers. He considered lying, offering the platitude people had fed him for 3 years about time healing all wounds. But something in Julia's face demanded truth. Some days get easier. The logistics smooth out. You learn to handle things you never thought you could. But the weight of being the only one responsible for a whole person, for their entire world? He paused, searching for words.
That doesn't get lighter. You just get stronger carrying it. Julia absorbed this, her eyes distant.
That's what I thought. Everyone keeps telling me it'll be fine, I'll manage, motherhood is natural. But nobody talks about the terror.
What are you afraid of?
Everything. The word came out like a confession. That I won't know what to do when she cries. That I'll be too tired to be a good mother. That she'll grow up knowing her father didn't want her, and it'll break something inside her I can't fix. Julia's voice cracked slightly. That I'll be alone in a room at 3 a.m. with a screaming baby and no idea what I'm doing, and there won't be anyone to call, anyone to help, anyone to tell me it's going to be okay. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a recognition so profound it was almost painful. I've been there. Different circumstances, same terror.
It's 3 a.m. and your kid is burning up with fever and you're Googling symptoms and half the internet says it's nothing and half says go to the ER immediately and you're the only one who has to make the call. How do you decide? Badly most of the time, but you decide anyway because not deciding isn't an option. He paused. I've gotten better at it, not perfect, but better. Julia looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time, past the awkwardness of the blind date to something more honest underneath. Your wife, what was she like? The question should have hurt. Instead, it felt like an unexpected gift, permission to talk about Sarah in a way most people avoided. Smart, funny, stubborn as hell. She never backed down from a fight, especially when it was about something she believed in. She would have hated this. Marcus gestured vaguely at the coffee shop, the date, the whole situation. Not you, just the setup, the manipulation. She believed in honesty above everything else. She sounds like someone I would have liked. Yeah, you would have. Marcus realized it was true. Sarah would have seen through Julia's defensive walls to the strength underneath, would have probably adopted her as a project, would have shown up at her apartment with casseroles and unsolicited advice and fierce loyalty. The waitress returned with their drinks. Marcus wrapped his hands around the mug, grateful for the warmth, the distraction. Julia sipped her latte carefully, leaving a foam mustache that she quickly wiped away. For a moment, she looked younger, almost carefree, before the exhaustion settled back over her features like a familiar coat. Then her posture changed. Her shoulders went rigid. Her eyes flicked over Marcus's shoulder to something behind him. He turned slightly and caught the source of her tension.
Two women at the next table, both middle-aged, both watching Julia with expressions that managed to be pitying and judgmental at the same time. They weren't even trying to be subtle about it, their heads close together, voices low, but not low enough.
Look at her, 7 months at least. And on a date, apparently. Poor thing. Poor him, you mean. Probably doesn't know what he's getting into. Marcus felt his jaw clench. Julia had gone very still, her hands frozen around her cup, staring down at the table like she could will herself invisible. He'd seen that look before, on his own face in the mirror during the first year after Sarah died, when every trip to the grocery store or playground meant facing people who looked at him with pity or curiosity or poorly disguised judgment about being a black single father who clearly couldn't handle his life. The women kept talking, their volume increasing either through carelessness or cruelty. She's trying to trap him. Classic move. Get pregnant, find someone desperate enough, or guilty enough. Look at him. Probably feels sorry for her. Julia's hands started to shake. She set down her cup carefully, precisely, like she was afraid any sudden movement would shatter her control. I need to go. Julia, I can't do this. She was already pushing back from the table, movements jerky and uncoordinated. I'm sorry. This was a mistake. Tell your mother I tried. She grabbed her purse and stood, and Marcus saw the exact moment she realized the entire coffee shop had gone quiet, everyone watching the pregnant woman flee her date, their faces showing varying degrees of sympathy and schadenfreude. Julia's face flushed red. She moved toward the door with as much dignity as she could muster, which wasn't much when you were 7 months pregnant and close to tears. Marcus sat frozen for 3 seconds that felt like hours. He could stay.
He could finish his coffee, wait a respectful interval, then leave and tell his mother the date hadn't worked out. He could go home to Isaiah and his quiet apartment and his carefully constructed life where nothing ever changed because change meant risk, and risk meant loss. He could do all of that. Or he could stand up. Marcus stood up. The two women at the next table looked at him expectantly, probably thinking he was leaving too, abandoning the awkward situation like any sensible person would. Instead, Marcus turned to face them directly. The coffee shop was still quiet enough that his voice carried to every corner. Excuse me. The women blinked. One of them, the blonde with the expensive handbag, arranged her face into false concern. Oh, honey, don't feel bad. She's clearly what? Marcus kept his voice level, conversational, but there was steel underneath. Pregnant? Yes, I noticed. What else is she clearly? The blonde's smile faltered. Her friend, a brunette in yoga pants, jumped in. We're just saying you seem like a nice guy. You shouldn't let yourself get taken advantage of. Taken advantage of how? By having coffee with someone? By listening to her talk? Marcus felt something building in his chest, something that had been building for 3 years of swallowed anger and silent grief and pretending he was fine when he wasn't. You don't know her. You don't know her story. You don't know anything except what you saw in 30 seconds and decided to judge her for. We're entitled to our opinions, the blonde said, but her voice had lost its confidence. You're entitled to keep them to yourself. Marcus looked around the coffee shop at all the faces watching, waiting to see what would happen next. That woman you were talking about? She deserves basic human respect. Not your pity, not your judgment. Respect. The same respect you'd want if your life fell apart and you had to rebuild it while everyone watched and whispered. The brunette opened her mouth, closed it. The blonde stared down at her phone, suddenly fascinated by something on the screen.
Around the coffee shop, people shifted in their seats, some looking guilty, others uncomfortable, a few nodding in agreement. Marcus didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked out, the door chiming behind him, the evening air cool against his face. The street was darkening, streetlights flickering on, and for a moment he didn't see Julia anywhere. Then he spotted her, standing by a parking meter about 20 feet away, one hand braced against it like she needed the support, the other pressed over her mouth. He walked over slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Julia." She didn't turn around. Her shoulders were shaking. "You didn't have to do that." "Yeah, I did. They're just strangers. It doesn't matter what they think. It matters that they think they have the right to say it out loud." Marcus moved to stand beside her, not too close, giving her space. "I spent 3 years listening to people talk about me like I wasn't there, about how sad it was, how hard it must be, how I'd probably have to give Isaiah to my mother because a man can't raise a child alone, especially not a black man. They never said it that directly, but I heard it anyway." Julia finally looked at him, tears tracking down her face that she didn't bother to wipe away. "Why did you come out here? Why didn't you just let me go?" "Because 3 years ago, when my wife died, I needed someone to stand up for me, and no one did. Everyone meant well, but meaning well isn't the same as showing up." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You walked into that coffee shop expecting me to leave. You probably expected everyone to judge you, and you were right. But you showed up anyway. That takes guts. It takes desperation. Maybe.
But I'm tired of watching people get treated like they're less than human just because life got messy. Your life, my life. We don't owe anyone an explanation." Marcus pulled out his phone, opened a new contact. "I don't know what this is. I don't know if we're friends or just two people stuck in the same bad situation. But if you need someone to talk to, someone who gets it, I can be that." Julia stared at the phone like it might bite her. "You don't owe me anything." "I know. I'm offering anyway." She took the phone with trembling hands, typed in her number slowly, then handed it back. Marcus saved the contact, sent a quick text so she'd have his information. Her phone buzzed in her purse. They stood together on the darkening street, two strangers bound by nothing except the recognition that the world was harder than it should be, and sometimes surviving meant accepting help from unexpected places. Julia spoke first. "I should go. I have a doctor's appointment early tomorrow."
"Okay."
She didn't move.
"Thank you for what you said in there. No one's defended me since—" She trailed off, shook her head. "It's been a while."
"You're welcome." Julia turned to leave, then stopped.
"Marcus, that thing you said about carrying the weight alone, about getting stronger instead of the weight getting lighter,
"Yeah?"
it felt real. Like maybe that's how it's supposed to feel." She held his eyes. "Like maybe I'm not doing it wrong after all."
Something in Marcus's chest loosened, just slightly. "You're not doing it wrong. You're doing it the only way you can. That's enough." Julia nodded once, then walked away down the street toward wherever she'd parked, her pace slow but steady. Marcus watched until she turned the corner and disappeared from view. His phone buzzed. A text from Julia, just 2 words. "Thank you." He stood there for another minute, trying to process what had just happened, what he'd just done. The blind date had lasted maybe 30 minutes. He hadn't learned much about Julia beyond the bare facts of her situation. He had no idea if they'd ever talk again, if that phone number would sit unused in his contacts like so many other empty gestures of connection people made and never followed through on. But he'd stood up. He'd spoken up. For the first time in 3 years, he'd chosen to engage instead of retreat, to risk discomfort for something that mattered, even if he couldn't quite articulate what that something was. His phone rang. Not Julia, his mother. Marcus considered not answering, but that would only delay the inevitable conversation. He accepted the call. His mother's voice was tight with worry and something else. Anger, maybe. "Did you meet Julia?" "I did." "And?" "And you knew, didn't you? You knew she was pregnant." Silence on the other end, which was answer enough. Marcus felt the anger he'd directed at those women in the coffee shop shift targets. "You let me walk in there blind. You let Mrs. Porter manipulate both of us. Why?" "Because you wouldn't have gone if you knew." His mother's voice cracked slightly. "And she needed someone, Marcus. She needed someone to not walk away, to see past the situation to the person. I thought maybe you could be that person." "By lying to me?" "By giving you a chance to do the right thing without overthinking it." His mother took a shaky breath. "Did you leave? Did you walk out on her?" Marcus closed his eyes, leaned against the parking meter where Julia had stood moments before. "No, I stayed. We talked. Then some women in the coffee shop said things they shouldn't have, and I said something back." "You defended her?" "Yeah." "Good." The relief in his mother's voice was palpable. "That's what Sarah would have wanted. That's who she married. The man who stands up for people." "This isn't about what Sarah wanted. This is about you manipulating me into a situation I wasn't ready for." "Maybe not. But you handled it anyway." His mother paused. "Are you going to see her again?" Marcus thought about Julia's face in the streetlight, tear-stained and defiant. Thought about the way she'd thanked him for something as basic as human decency, like it was a rare gift instead of a minimum standard. Thought about Isaiah's drawing in his pocket, 3 stick figures holding hands. "I don't know. Maybe. We exchanged numbers." "That's a start." "Mom, if you ever lie to me like this again..." "I won't have to. You know now. What you do with it is up to you." She softened slightly. "Come home, Marcus. Isaiah's waiting to hear about the pretty lady." The call ended. Marcus stood alone on the street as full dark settled over the city, the Friday night crowd starting to emerge from restaurants and bars, couples and friends and people with lives that looked nothing like his. He pulled out his phone, looked at Julia's contact information, the 2-word text she'd sent. He started to type a response, then stopped. What was there to say? That tonight had been strange and uncomfortable and surprisingly honest? That he didn't regret it exactly, but didn't know what to do with it either? In the end, he sent nothing. Just pocketed the phone and walked to his car, the weight of the evening settling over him like a coat he couldn't quite shake off. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and stop signs, his mind replaying fragments of conversation, the look on Julia's face, the sound of his own voice saying things he hadn't planned, hadn't even known he believed until the words were out. Isaiah was asleep on the couch when Marcus arrived home, curled up under his dinosaur blanket, one hand tucked under his cheek. His mother sat in the chair across from him, knitting abandoned in her lap. She looked up as Marcus entered, questions in her eyes that she didn't voice. Marcus shook his head slightly, not ready to talk, and moved to scoop Isaiah into his arms. His son stirred but didn't wake, just mumbled something incomprehensible and burrowed into Marcus's shoulder. In Isaiah's room, Marcus laid him gently in bed, pulled the covers up, smoothed the hair back from his forehead. The nightlight cast soft shadows across the walls, across the collection of drawings and school projects that documented a childhood being lived despite everything. Isaiah's breathing was steady and even, no wheeze, no struggle, just the simple rhythm of a healthy kid lost in whatever dreams 6-year-olds had. Marcus stood there longer than necessary, watching his son sleep, thinking about Julia somewhere across town, alone with her fears and her belly full of life that would arrive in a matter of weeks, whether she was ready or not. Thinking about the women in the coffee shop and all the other people who felt entitled to judge situations they didn't understand.
Thinking about Sarah, about the promise she'd extracted from his mother, about whether standing up for a stranger counted as moving on or just being decent. His phone buzzed. Another text from Julia. "I know you're probably asleep, but I wanted to say it was nice to talk to someone who didn't treat me like a tragedy or a cautionary tale, just as a person. So thanks for that, too."
Marcus typed back, "You are a person. That's not something you should have to thank anyone for recognizing." The response came quickly. "Maybe not, but I do anyway." Then, "Good night, Marcus." Marcus replied, "Good night, Julia." He set his phone on Isaiah's dresser and sat down in the rocking chair by the window, the one Sarah used to nurse in, the one he couldn't bring himself to move, even though it took up too much space in the small room. Through the window, the city lights stretched out like scattered stars, each one representing someone's story, someone's struggle, someone's small victory or quiet defeat. Somewhere out there, Julia was probably sitting in a similar room, preparing for a future that looked nothing like what she'd planned. And tomorrow, Marcus would wake up and go through the same routine he'd perfected over 3 years, getting Isaiah ready for Saturday activities, doing laundry, meal prep, all the small tasks that made up a life lived in the margins of what he'd once imagined. But tonight, something had shifted. Something small and fragile, like the first crack in ice that's been frozen too long. Marcus didn't know what it meant or where it would lead. Didn't know if he'd see Julia again, or if tonight would fade into just another story about the time his mother tried to set him up and it went nowhere. What he knew was this: he'd stood up when standing up mattered. He'd chosen truth over comfort. He'd seen another person's pain and recognized it as real, as valid, as deserving of defense even when defense came with risk. It wasn't romance. It wasn't rescue. It wasn't any of the things his family probably hoped for when they orchestrated this disaster of a blind date. But it was honest. And after 3 years of pretending he was fine when he wasn't, honesty felt like something worth holding on to, even if he had no idea what to do with it next. The text arrived at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, 3 days after the coffee shop. Marcus was awake anyway, had been awake since Isaiah's breathing turned rough around midnight, the familiar wheeze that meant another asthma attack brewing. He'd already administered the inhaler twice, set up the humidifier, propped his son up with extra pillows. Now he sat on the floor beside Isaiah's bed, one hand resting lightly on the boy's chest, feeling the rise and fall, counting breaths the way he'd learned to do in the ER during that first terrifying attack when Isaiah was 4. The phone screen lit up the darkened room. Julia's name appeared, and Marcus felt a small jolt of surprise. He'd half expected their exchange to end with those good night texts, another connection that faded into the background noise of modern life. "Can't sleep. Baby's doing gymnastics and my back is killing me." This is probably weird, but do you ever feel like 3 a.m. is when all the scary thoughts come out to play? Marcus looked at his son's sleeping face, the slight furrow between his eyebrows that meant he was fighting to breathe, even in sleep. He typed back, "Every night. What are you scared of tonight?" The response came quickly. "That I won't know what I'm doing. That she'll need something and I won't understand what. That I'll be so tired I'll make mistakes that matter." Marcus understood that fear at a cellular level. He'd lived it for 3 years, still lived it every time Isaiah's breathing changed or a fever spiked or any of the 1,000 small crises that came with keeping a tiny human alive. You'll make mistakes. Everyone does. But you'll also figure things out, and you'll love her enough
that the mistakes won't destroy her. How do you know? Because you're scared. People who don't care aren't scared.
The conversation continued for an hour, neither of them acknowledging the strangeness of it. Two near strangers sharing the dark hours when defenses dropped and truth slipped through the cracks. Julia talked about the baby's movements, about how she'd already memorized the pattern of kicks and could tell when something felt off. Marcus shared the story of Isaiah's first asthma attack, the terror of watching his son struggle for air, the guilt of not recognizing the signs sooner. "Does the guilt ever go away?" Julia asked. "No, but you learn to carry it better." When Isaiah's breathing finally settled into an easy rhythm around 4 a.m., Marcus sent one final text. "I should try to sleep. Isaiah has a doctor's appointment in the morning." "Is he okay?" "Asthma. He's fine now, just needs monitoring." "You're a good dad, Marcus." The simplicity of it hit harder than it should have. Marcus stared at those 5 words until the screen dimmed, then set the phone aside and curled up on the floor next to Isaiah's bed, too tired to make it back to his own room. The pattern repeated itself over the next week. Julia would text late at night, sometimes with questions, sometimes just observations about pregnancy or loneliness or the strange experience of preparing for someone who didn't exist yet but already dominated every aspect of her life. Marcus would respond when he could, which was often because sleep had become a luxury he couldn't quite afford between work and Isaiah and the constant low-grade anxiety that something would go wrong. They didn't talk about meeting again. The subject hung unspoken between their messages like a question neither was ready to ask. Marcus told himself it was better this way, easier. Text messages were safe. Text messages didn't require him to navigate the complicated reality of what it might mean to actually spend time with a woman who was about to become a mother, while he was still trying to figure out how to be a father. Then Friday came, and with it, a text from Julia at a more reasonable hour. Isaiah's appointment went okay? Marcus was at the park, watching his son climb the jungle gym with the fearless abandon of someone who'd forgotten he had lungs that could betray him at any moment. "He's good. Doctor says to keep doing what we're doing." "Where are you now?" "Riverside Park." Isaiah needed to burn off energy before he destroys the apartment. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "I'm actually nearby, at the coffee shop 2 blocks over. The one with the outdoor seating?" Marcus's thumb hovered over the keyboard. This was a choice point. He recognized that. He could make an excuse, keep the relationship safely contained in the digital space where it had lived comfortably for a week. Or he could type the words that would shift something he wasn't sure he was ready to shift. He typed, "We could swing by, if you want company." "I'd like that." Isaiah was thrilled at the prospect of stopping for hot chocolate, which was the only reason Marcus gave himself for the decision. They walked the 2 blocks in the late afternoon sunshine, Isaiah chattering about the rocks he'd found and the bird he'd seen and how his friend Ethan's mom was going to have a baby, and wasn't that cool, Dad? Julia sat at one of the outdoor tables, a mug cradled between her hands, her face turned up toward the weak autumn sun. She looked different in daylight, younger somehow, despite the obvious exhaustion. She'd pulled her hair back in a messy bun, and she wore jeans with an elastic waistband and a soft blue sweater that made her eyes look lighter. She saw them approaching and smiled, tentative but genuine. Isaiah broke free from Marcus's hand and ran ahead, all 6-year-old energy and curiosity. "Are you Miss Julia? Dad talks about you. Well, he texts you. I see him smiling at his phone, and he never smiles at his phone, so I figured it was probably a girl." Marcus caught up, mortified. "Isaiah, personal space, remember?" Julia laughed, the first real laugh Marcus had heard from her. "It's okay. Yes, I'm Julia. And you must be Isaiah. Your dad's told me about you, too." "Did he tell you I have asthma, but I'm really brave about it?" "He mentioned the brave part." Isaiah studied her for a moment with the unself-conscious directness of childhood. "Your tummy's really big. Do you have a baby in there?" "Isaiah."
Marcus's voice carried a warning. Julia waved him off. It's fine. Yes, I have a baby. A girl. She's going to be born in about 6 weeks. 6 weeks isn't very long.
Are you ready? The question was so earnest, so perfectly innocent, that Julia's composure cracked for just a moment. I'm getting there. Some days I feel ready. Other days, not so much. That's okay. Dad says being scared is normal. He was scared when Mom died, but he learned how to take care of me anyway. The words hung in the air. Marcus wished he could rewind 30 seconds, find a way to steer the conversation anywhere else. But Julia didn't look uncomfortable. If anything, her expression softened. Your dad sounds very wise. He is. He's the best dad. Can I get hot chocolate? Dad said maybe. Marcus seized the excuse. Yeah, let me order. Julia, you want anything? I'm good, but thank you. Inside the coffee shop, Marcus took his time with the order, giving Julia and Isaiah space, giving himself space to process the surreal reality of this moment. Through the window, he could see them talking, Isaiah's hands moving in wild gestures as he told some story, Julia listening with what looked like genuine interest. When he returned with Isaiah's hot chocolate and a coffee he didn't really want, his son had pulled out a piece of paper and was showing Julia one of his drawings. Marcus recognized it as the one from last night, a rocket ship surrounded by stars. It's beautiful. Julia traced the outline with one finger. Are you going to be an astronaut? Maybe. Or a scientist. Or a dinosaur doctor. I haven't decided yet. Those are all excellent options. Julia looked up as Marcus set the drinks down. He's amazing. He has his moments. Marcus ruffled Isaiah's hair. Drink your chocolate, buddy. It's going to get cold. They fell into an easy rhythm after that, conversation flowing in fits and starts around Isaiah's interruptions and observations. Julia talked about teaching, about the elementary school where she'd worked until her pregnancy made standing for 6 hours a day impossible. Isaiah asked questions with the relentless curiosity of his age, and Julia answered them with patience Marcus found himself grateful for. At some point, Isaiah spotted a friend from school across the park and begged to go play. Marcus hesitated, not wanting to leave Julia alone, but also not wanting to trap her in a conversation she hadn't signed up for. She must have read his face because she nodded toward the playground. Go. I'm not going anywhere. Marcus let Isaiah drag him 20 feet away to where a cluster of parents stood watching their children navigate the social dynamics of the sandbox. He recognized a few faces, offered polite nods, tried to keep one eye on Julia while Isaiah raced around with his friend. One of the mothers, Linda, the same woman who'd approached them at the park last week, moved to stand beside him. She was in her 40s, kind-faced, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent years managing chaos with grace. That your girlfriend? Marcus's first instinct was to deny it, but the words stuck. Just a friend. Linda raised an eyebrow. Marcus, I've been doing this parent thing for 15 years. I know what just a friend looks like, and that's not it. It's complicated. The good ones usually are. Linda watched Julia for a moment. She looks like she could use some support. Being pregnant and alone is brutal. Trust me, I know. Marcus glanced at her. You were alone? With my first. The father decided parenthood wasn't for him about 2 weeks before my due date. Thought my world was ending. Linda smiled. Turned out it was just beginning. Different than I planned, but not worse. Sometimes better. The words settled into Marcus like stones, heavy and solid. He watched Julia sip her coffee, one hand resting on her belly in that protective gesture he'd come to recognize. Across the playground, Isaiah's laughter rang out clear and bright. I don't know what I'm doing. The admission came out before Marcus could stop it. Linda's expression softened. Nobody does. We're all just making it up as we go, hoping we don't screw up too badly. She paused. But for what it's worth, the fact that you're here, that you showed up and you're still showing up, that matters more than you think. Isaiah came running over, breathless and grinning. Dad,
Can we show Miss Julia the duck pond? Please? Marcus looked at Julia, who'd overheard and was already standing, gathering her things with the careful movements of someone who'd learned to budget energy. If you're tired, I'm fine. A walk sounds nice. They made their way around the park's perimeter, Isaiah running ahead and circling back like an enthusiastic puppy, pointing out every flower and stick and piece of interesting trash with equal enthusiasm. Marcus fell into step beside Julia, close enough to help if she stumbled, but not so close as to crowd. He's really great. Julia's voice was quiet, almost wistful. You've done an incredible job with him. I've done a terrified job with him. There's a difference. I don't think there is. Not when it counts. Julia paused to catch her breath, one hand pressed to her lower back. Can I ask you something? Sure. That night at the coffee shop, you said you'd spent 3 years listening to people talk about you like you weren't there. What did they say? Marcus considered dodging the question, but Julia's face held genuine curiosity, not pity. That it was sad? That Isaiah would suffer from not having a mother? That I should find someone quickly, for his sake, before he got too old and the damage was permanent? He heard the bitterness in his own voice. My favorite was when people would tell me how brave I was, like being a father to my own kid was some kind of heroic sacrifice instead of just basic responsibility. People said similar things to me, not about being brave, more about how I'd made my bed and now I had to lie in it. How if I'd been more careful, more responsible, none of this would have happened. Julia's jaw tightened, like I got pregnant on purpose to ruin their day. What about Emma's father? Does he know? Julia's hand moved to her belly, that protective reflex. Kyle knows. He made it clear he wasn't interested in being involved. Blocked my number, blocked my email, blocked me on every social media platform he could find. I tried to reach him through friends, but he told them he'd lawyer up if I kept harassing him. The casual cruelty of it made Marcus's hands curl into fists. That's not harassment. That's informing someone they're about to be a father. His definition differs. Julia's voice had gone flat, empty. I spent 3 months trying to reach him, trying to make him understand that I wasn't asking for money or commitment or anything except acknowledgement that this was happening. He responded by moving to another state. Isaiah chose that moment to race back, holding up a rock shaped vaguely like a heart. Look, it's a heart rock! Miss Julia, you should have it. For the baby. For good luck. Julia took the rock with both hands, cradling it like something precious. Thank you, Isaiah. This is the nicest gift I've gotten in a long time. Really? It's just a rock. Sometimes the best gifts are simple things given with love. Julia met Marcus's eyes over Isaiah's head, something passing between them that felt too big for the moment, but somehow fit perfectly. They reached the duck pond, where a dozen mallards paddled in lazy circles, occasionally diving for food that visitors had tossed, despite the numerous signs requesting people not feed the wildlife. Isaiah immediately began searching for appropriate throwing stones, his attention fully captured by the ducks' activities. Marcus and Julia stood side by side on the concrete walkway, watching the water ripple in the fading light. The temperature was dropping as evening approached, and Marcus noticed Julia shiver slightly. You should probably head home. Get warm. Probably. She didn't move. Marcus, can I ask you something else? And I need you to be honest. Okay. Why are you doing this? The texts, meeting up today, all of it. Is it pity? The directness of the question caught him off guard. Marcus took a moment to formulate an answer that was true. 3 years ago, when Sarah died, I needed someone to see me as a person instead of a tragedy. Someone who wouldn't treat me like I was broken or helpless or in need of fixing. I needed someone to just sit with me in the mess and not try to solve it. He turned to face her fully. I'm not doing this out of pity. I'm doing it because I recognize what it feels like to be where you are. and I know how much it matters when someone chooses to show up without an agenda. Julia's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I don't know how to do this. Any of this. Being a mother, being alone, being brave enough to accept help when I've spent my whole life proving I don't need anyone. You don't have to know. You just have to keep going. What if I can't? Marcus thought about the night Sarah died, about the week after when he'd seriously considered calling his mother and telling her to take Isaiah, to raise him properly because Marcus clearly couldn't handle it. He thought about the thousands of small moments since then when he'd felt completely out of his depth, when he'd made mistakes and felt like a failure and wanted to quit. You can't is not an option when there's someone depending on you. So you find a way, even when you're terrified, even when you're exhausted, even when every voice in your head is screaming that you're not enough. He paused. You're going to be enough, Julia. Not perfect, but enough. She nodded, not trusting her voice. They stood in silence as Isaiah continued his rock collection, as the ducks paddled their endless circuits, as the world continued its indifferent rotation around people trying their best not to fall apart. Julia's phone buzzed. She checked it, and her face went pale. Everything okay? Doctor's office. They moved my appointment to Monday. She looked up, and Marcus saw real fear in her eyes. The 38-week checkup. Where they decide if everything's progressing normally, or if we need to intervene. Intervene how? Early induction. C-section if the baby's not positioned right. I've been having some issues with my blood pressure, and they want to make sure we don't wait too long if things are getting risky. Marcus absorbed this, the reminder that Julia wasn't just pregnant, she was medically pregnant, with complications and potential dangers that went beyond the emotional weight of single parenthood. Will someone go with you? To the appointment? My aunt offered, but honestly I'd rather go alone than listen to her opinions about every decision I make. The words came out before Marcus fully thought them through. I could go, if you want. Not to give opinions, just to be there. To drive if you're stressed. To remember what the doctor says when you're too overwhelmed to process it. Julia stared at him. Marcus, you barely know me. You don't owe me that. I know, but I'm offering anyway. Something shifted in her expression, walls lowering just slightly. Why? Because 3 months from now, when you're in the thick of it, when you're exhausted and scared and wondering if you made the right call, accepting help from someone you met on a blind date that went sideways in a coffee shop, I want you to remember that I showed up because I wanted to, not because I had to. Julia opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. Monday, 2 p.m. Medical Center on 5th Avenue. I'll be there. Isaiah returned, pockets bulging with rocks, face flushed with cold and happiness. Dad, can Miss Julia come to our house? We could have dinner and I could show her my room and my books and... Isaiah, Miss Julia probably has plans. Actually, I don't. Julia looked at Marcus, a question in her eyes. If the invitation's genuine, I'd like that. I'm tired of eating alone. Marcus thought about his refrigerator, which contained approximately 3 meals worth of groceries purchased in a haze of exhaustion on Tuesday. He thought about his apartment, which was clean by his standards, but probably not by any objective measure. He thought about all the reasons this was moving too fast, becoming too real, pushing past the safe boundaries of occasional texts and chance meetings. He said yes anyway. The walk back to the car, the drive to his apartment, the process of unlocking the door and ushering everyone inside, all passed in a blur of activity that didn't leave room for second guessing. Isaiah immediately began the tour, dragging Julia from room to room, showing her his toys and books and the collection of leaves he'd been pressing between wax paper for a school project. Marcus retreated to the kitchen, staring into the refrigerator like it might spontaneously generate a dinner impressive enough for company. He settled on pasta, which seemed safe and difficult to screw up, and was halfway through boiling water when Julia appeared in the doorway. "Your home is nice. It feels lived in. Real."
That's a polite way of saying it looks like a single dad lives here.
"No, I mean it. My apartment is so sterile. I haven't wanted to set up the nursery yet because if I do, it makes everything too real. And I'm not ready for real." Julia leaned against the counter. "But this feels like an actual home. Like people are happy here, despite everything." Marcus considered this while measuring pasta by the handful method Sarah had taught him. "We're working on happy. Some days are easier than others. Can I help with anything? You can keep me company. And maybe tell me if you have any food allergies I should know about." Julia settled into one of the kitchen chairs with visible relief, her hand moving to support her lower back. "No allergies. But I'm supposed to avoid soft cheeses and deli meat and basically everything that sounds good." They fell into comfortable conversation while Marcus cooked, the kind of easy back and forth that came from late-night texts translated into real-time interaction. Julia talked about teaching, about the kids she'd miss when she went on leave, about the guilt of abandoning them mid-year even though she knew it was necessary. Marcus shared stories about work, about the strange satisfaction of solving problems through data, about the disconnect between being respected professionally and completely lost personally. Isaiah wandered in and out, adding his commentary, asking questions that were sometimes profound and sometimes absurd, treating Julia's presence like it was the most natural thing in the world. When the pasta was ready, they ate at the small kitchen table, knees almost touching in the cramped space, conversation flowing around mouthfuls of food and Isaiah's enthusiastic description of everything that had happened at school that week. After dinner, Isaiah insisted on showing Julia his drawings, the accumulated artwork of 3 years pinned to his bedroom walls. Marcus stood in the doorway, watching his son explain each piece with the seriousness of a museum curator, watching Julia listen with attention that seemed genuine rather than polite. One drawing in particular caught her attention. 3 stick figures, carefully colored, holding hands under a bright yellow sun. "Who are these people?" Isaiah glanced at Marcus, then back at the picture. "That's me and Dad and someone. I drew it last week, but I didn't know who to put there yet." The admission hung in the air. Julia touched the drawing lightly, her finger tracing the outline of the unknown figure.
Whoever she is, she's lucky to be in a family with you two.
Later, after Isaiah had been convinced to put on pajamas and brush his teeth, after the bedtime story that Julia had been invited to listen to and had accepted, after Marcus had tucked his son in with the ritual of checking the inhaler and adjusting the humidifier and leaving the nightlight on, Marcus found Julia in the living room, staring at the photos on the wall. Most of them were of Isaiah at various ages, documenting a childhood in progress, but there were a few of Sarah, carefully placed among the others, integrated rather than isolated. Sarah holding newborn Isaiah, Sarah laughing at something off camera, Sarah and Marcus on their wedding day, young and impossibly naive about what was coming. She was beautiful. Marcus moved to stand beside her. She was. Inside and out.
Do you still love her? The question should have been intrusive, but Julia asked it with such quiet sincerity that it felt like genuine curiosity rather than judgment. Marcus studied Sarah's face in the wedding photo, remembering that day, that version of himself who'd believed in happily ever after. I'll always love her. She's part of who I am, part of what made me capable of being Isaiah's father. Losing her didn't erase that. Julia nodded slowly. I worry sometimes that Emma will grow up seeing other kids with fathers and feeling like she's missing something essential, like I failed her before she even had a chance. She won't be missing something. She'll have you, and that will be enough, even when it feels like it isn't. You keep saying that. How do you know? Marcus turned to face her fully. Because Isaiah asked me last year why he didn't have a mom like other kids, and I told him that families come in all shapes, that what matters is love and showing up
and trying your best even when you fail. He accepted that because kids are resilient in ways we underestimate. He paused. Emma will have challenges, but having a mother who loves her and fights for her, that's not failing. That's everything. Julia's composure cracked. Tears spilled over, and she pressed both hands to her face, shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. Marcus hesitated, then moved closer, offering presence without touch, letting her have the space to fall apart without judgment. When she finally looked up, her face was blotchy and wet. "I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm crying." "Because you're exhausted and scared, and you've been holding everything together alone for too long. You're allowed to cry." "I don't want to be weak." "Crying isn't weakness. It's your body processing more than you can hold." Marcus grabbed the box of tissues from the side table, handed it to her. Sarah used to say that tears were just feelings with nowhere else to go. Julia took the tissues, dabbed at her eyes. "I should go. It's getting late, and you've already done too much." "You're welcome to stay longer, or to go if you need to. No pressure either way." She stood slowly, gathering her purse, her sweater. Marcus walked her to the door, suddenly aware of how domestic the whole evening had been, how easy it would be to let this become routine without ever discussing what it meant or where it was heading. At the door, Julia turned back. "Monday, 2 p.m. You're sure?" "I'm sure." "Thank you, Marcus. For dinner, for listening, for not treating me like I'm made of glass or asking for something in return." "You don't need to thank me for basic decency." "Maybe not, but I'm going to anyway." She smiled, tired but genuine. "Good night." "Good night, Julia." He watched her walk to her car, watched her drive away into the dark, then closed the door and leaned against it. The apartment felt different now, like Julia's presence had left some impression that wouldn't quite fade. In Isaiah's room, soft snoring indicated his son had fallen asleep quickly, secure in his small world where Miss Julia was now a fixture, someone who belonged. Marcus's phone buzzed. "Julia. Thank you for tonight. Emma's kicking like crazy, probably saying thank you too for the pasta." He smiled despite himself. "Tell her she's welcome, and try to get some sleep." "You too. See you Monday." Marcus set his phone down and moved through the apartment, cleaning up the remnants of dinner, straightening the living room, performing the nightly rituals that kept chaos at bay. His mind kept circling back to the evening, to the easy way Julia had fit into their space, to Isaiah's obvious attachment to her, to the feeling of rightness that seemed to hover over the whole interaction, like a blessing he hadn't asked for, but couldn't quite refuse. Monday came faster than expected. Marcus arranged to leave work early, citing a personal appointment that his manager accepted without question. He'd built up enough goodwill over 3 years of being the reliable one that taking an afternoon off didn't raise eyebrows. He picked up Julia at her apartment, a small one-bedroom in a complex that had seen better days. She emerged looking pale and stressed, one hand pressed to her belly. "Everything okay?" "She's been quiet today. Usually she's doing backflips by now." Julia settled into the passenger seat with difficulty. "It's probably nothing, but it's making me nervous." The drive to the medical center was mostly silent, Julia staring out the window, Marcus navigating traffic while his mind ran through worst-case scenarios he had no right to be imagining. He wasn't Emma's father. He had no claim to this situation beyond the strange friendship that had developed between two people who'd started in the most unlikely circumstances. But he was here. And that seemed to matter, at least to Julia, whose hand kept moving to her belly as if she could reassure the baby through touch alone. The medical center was busy, full of pregnant women in various stages, and their partners, mothers, friends. Marcus felt conspicuous as he followed Julia to the check-in desk, aware of how they must look, a black man and a white woman who were clearly together, but just as clearly not in the conventional sense. The wait was interminable. They sat in uncomfortable chairs, flipping through magazines neither of them read, until a nurse called Julia's name. She stood, then looked at Marcus with uncertainty. "You can come back, if you want." He followed her through the maze of hallways to an examination room where the nurse took vitals, asked questions, made notes on a chart with efficient movements. Julia's blood pressure was slightly elevated, but not dangerously so. The nurse left them alone to wait for the doctor. Julia sat on the examination table, paper crinkling beneath her, hands folded in her lap. "You really didn't have to come." "I know. But I'm glad you did." Before Marcus could respond, the door opened and a woman in her 50s entered, white coat and confident smile. "Julia, good to see you. And this must be your partner?" "Friend. He's a friend." The doctor's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes suggested she'd heard that before and knew it meant 1,000 different things. "Well, friend, I'm Dr. Patterson. Let's see how baby is doing, shall we?" What followed was a blur of medical procedures Marcus only partially understood. Ultrasound, measurements, questions about contractions and movement and fluid intake. Dr. Patterson's face remained professionally neutral throughout, which Marcus had learned was either very good or very bad. Finally, the doctor straightened, wiping gel from the ultrasound wand. "Baby looks good. Heart rate is strong. Position is favorable. Your blood pressure is something we need to watch, but it's not critical yet." Julia's relief was visible. "So, everything's normal?" "Normal enough. I want to see you again next week instead of 2 weeks, and if you have any signs of early labor, headaches, vision changes, anything unusual, I want you to call immediately. We may need to induce early if your blood pressure doesn't stabilize, but for now, we wait and monitor." After the appointment, they sat in Marcus's car in the parking lot. Julia was crying again, quiet tears of relief and residual fear. Marcus let her cry, didn't try to fix it or minimize it, just sat with her in the reality that sometimes everything could be fine and you could still be terrified. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I don't want to do this alone. The birth, I mean." "My aunt said she'd be there, but the thought of her in that room, judging every decision, giving advice I didn't ask for." Julia trailed off. "I know this is asking too much, but would you consider being there? Not as Emma's father, just as someone who won't make me feel like I'm failing." Marcus's first instinct was to say no, to explain all the reasons why that was crossing a line, entering territory that went beyond friendship into something neither of them had defined. But he looked at Julia's face, saw the vulnerability and hope there, and found himself saying something completely different. "Yes, if that's what you want, I'll be there." The call came at 11:43 p.m. on a Thursday, 2 weeks after the doctor's appointment. Marcus was helping Isaiah with a last-minute science project that was due tomorrow. Something about the water cycle that should have been started a week ago, but somehow hadn't been. His phone lit up with Julia's name, and his stomach dropped before he even answered. Her voice came through tight with pain. "Marcus, I think it's time. Contractions started about an hour ago. They're getting closer together, and I can't reach my aunt." Marcus was already moving, grabbing his keys, his wallet, mentally calculating how fast he could get to Julia's apartment. "Have you called the doctor?" "She said to come in when contractions are 5 minutes apart. We're at 7 minutes now." Julia's breath hitched. "I'm scared." "I'm on my way. Pack your hospital bag if you haven't already. I'll be there in 15 minutes. He hung up and turned to Isaiah, who'd been listening with wide eyes. "Buddy, I need to take Miss Julia to the hospital. The baby's coming." Isaiah's face lit up. "Now? Tonight?" "Yeah. I'm going to call Grandma to come stay with you, okay?" "Can I come see the baby after?" Marcus knelt down, gripping his son's shoulders. "Maybe. We'll see how everything goes. But right now, I need you to be brave and flexible, all right? This is important." Isaiah nodded solemnly. "I can be brave.
Tell Miss Julia I said good luck. His mother answered on the second ring, already alert despite the late hour. Marcus explained in rapid sentences, and she promised to be there in 20 minutes. He grabbed his jacket, double-checked that Isaiah had his inhaler within reach, then was out the door and in his car before his brain could catch up to what he'd just committed to. Julia's apartment complex was dark, except for scattered windows. He found her sitting on the front steps, hospital bag beside her, both arms wrapped around her belly. Her face was pale in the streetlight, drawn with pain and fear. She stood when she saw him, moving carefully. I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you signed up for. Marcus took her bag, offered his arm for support. Stop apologizing. Let's get you to the hospital.
The drive was tense, punctuated by Julia's breathing through contractions, her hand gripping the door handle until her knuckles went white. Marcus kept his eyes on the road, his voice steady, talking her through each wave of pain with a calmness he didn't feel. The emergency entrance was bright and bustling despite the hour. A nurse appeared with a wheelchair, whisking Julia away before Marcus had fully processed that they'd arrived. He followed at a distance, suddenly uncertain of his place in this unfolding drama. In the labor and delivery ward, nurses swarmed Julia with practiced efficiency, hooking her up to monitors, asking questions, checking vitals. Marcus stood against the wall, trying to be invisible, trying not to think about Sarah's labor with Isaiah, which had been long and difficult, but ultimately triumphant, a memory now tinged with the knowledge of how quickly triumph could turn to tragedy. A nurse glanced at him. Dad, you can come closer. She needs you. Marcus started to correct her, to explain he wasn't the father, but Julia's hand shot out, searching for his. He moved to the bedside, let her grip his fingers with surprising strength. Don't leave. Her voice was small, almost childlike. Please don't leave. I'm not going anywhere. Dr. Patterson appeared around midnight, checking Julia's progress with professional detachment that somehow managed to be reassuring. You're at 6 centimeters. Moving along nicely. Baby's heart rate is good. Your blood pressure is holding steady. We'll keep monitoring, but so far everything looks normal. The hours blurred together after that. Marcus lost track of time in the fluorescent-lit room where day and night had no meaning, where the only rhythm was the beeping of monitors and Julia's breathing through increasingly intense contractions. He held her hand, brought her ice chips, pressed cool cloths to her forehead, whispered encouragement that felt inadequate, but was all he had to offer. Around 3 a.m., Julia grabbed his wrist with both hands, her nails digging in hard enough to leave marks. I can't do this. It's too much. I need drugs. I need an epidural. I need... Dr. Patterson checked her again, then looked up with a smile. You're at 9 centimeters. Too late for an epidural now. You're going to meet your daughter very soon. Julia's response was a string of creative profanity that would have been impressive if it weren't so clearly born of desperation. Marcus found himself talking to her in the same voice he used with Isaiah during asthma attacks, low and steady, grounding her when panic threatened to take over. You can do this. Your body knows what to do. Breathe with me, just like we practiced. We never practiced. Then we're learning together. In through your nose, out through your mouth. She followed his breathing for 3 contractions, then lost the rhythm as another wave of pain hit. Marcus kept his hand in hers, let her crush his fingers, bore witness to something primal and terrifying and miraculous all at once. At 4:17 a.m., Dr. Patterson took her position at the foot of the bed. Okay, Julia. Next contraction. I need you to push. What followed was the most intense 30 minutes of Marcus's life. Julia pushed with everything she had, her face contorted with effort, sweat pouring down her temples. Between contractions, she collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted beyond anything Marcus had seen. He kept talking, kept encouraging, kept being the anchor she seemed to need, even though he felt completely out of his depth. This wasn't his child. This wasn't his moment. But Julia's hand in his made it impossible to remain detached, made him invested in an outcome he had no right to claim. Then a cry pierced the air, thin and outraged, and Dr. Patterson was lifting a tiny, wrinkled, impossibly perfect human into view. "It's a girl, strong and healthy," Julia sobbed, reaching for her daughter with shaking hands. The nurse placed Emma on Julia's chest, and the baby's cries quieted as she found her mother's heartbeat, the rhythm she'd known for 9 months. Julia's arms came around her, protective and certain, and in that moment, every doubt she'd voiced over the past weeks seemed to evaporate. Marcus stepped back, giving them space, feeling the weight of what he'd just witnessed settle over him like a physical thing. He'd seen life begin again in this room, seen Julia transform from terrified woman to fierce mother in the space of a heartbeat. A nurse touched his arm. "Dad, would you like to cut the cord?" This time, he did correct her. "I'm not her father." The nurse looked confused, glanced at Julia, who was too absorbed in Emma to notice the conversation. "Oh, I just assumed. You've been so involved." Marcus didn't know how to explain the situation in a way that made sense, so he just shook his head and moved to the corner while the medical team finished their work. They cleaned Emma, measured her, wrapped her in a hospital blanket, then returned her to Julia's waiting arms. Julia looked up, found Marcus in the corner, and her face split into an exhausted, radiant smile. "Marcus, come meet Emma." He approached slowly, looking down at the tiny face peeking out from the blanket. Emma had stopped crying, her eyes squeezed shut, one miniature fist pressed against her cheek. She was perfect in the way all newborns were perfect, potential and promise wrapped in skin so delicate it seemed impossible she'd survive in the world outside. "She's beautiful." "She is." Julia's voice was thick with emotion. "Thank you for being here. I couldn't have done this without you." "You absolutely could have. But I'm glad I was here anyway." A nurse interrupted to take Emma for more tests, promising to return her shortly. Another nurse helped Julia into a fresh gown, moved her to a recovery room that was quieter, dimmer, more conducive to the rest she desperately needed. Marcus checked his phone. 5:43 a.m. His mother had texted twice, asking for updates. He sent back, "Baby arrived healthy. Julia's doing well. We'll call later." In the recovery room, Julia lay propped up on pillows, her eyes already drifting closed despite her obvious efforts to stay awake. "You should go. Get some sleep. I know you have Isaiah to think about." Marcus pulled a chair close to the bed. "I'll stay a bit longer. Make sure you're settled." "Marcus." Julia's eyes opened, focused on him with sudden intensity. "What are we doing? This whole thing, what is it?" The question hung between them, demanding honesty that neither had been brave enough to voice until now. Marcus thought about the past weeks, the late-night texts, the doctor's appointment, the dinner at his apartment, Isaiah's drawings, this moment in a hospital room at dawn. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it matters." Julia's eyes filled with tears again, but these were different, softer. "I'm terrified of meeting you, of Emma getting attached, of building something that falls apart and hurts everyone." "I'm terrified too. But I'm here anyway, and that has to mean something." Before Julia could respond, a commotion in the hallway interrupted them. Raised voices, one of them familiar and unwelcome. Marcus stood, moving toward the door just as it burst open. Kyle stood there, disheveled and angry,
his eyes wild. Behind him, a nurse was trying to intervene, her voice sharp with authority that Kyle was ignoring. "Sir, you can't just barge in here. This is a recovery room." Kyle brushed past her, his focus locked on Julia. "I came as soon as I heard. My baby."
"Where is she?" Julia's face had gone white. "How did you even know?" "Your aunt called my mother, said I should know my daughter was born." Kyle moved closer to the bed, and Marcus shifted to block his path without consciously deciding to do so. Kyle noticed him for the first time, confusion crossing his features. "Who the hell are you?" "A friend." Marcus kept his voice level, non-threatening, but he didn't move from his position between Kyle and Julia. "A friend?" Kyle's laugh was ugly. "You move fast, Julia. Baby's not even an hour old, and you've already replaced me." Julia found her voice, though it shook. "You left. You blocked me, moved states, made it clear you wanted nothing to do with this. You don't get to show up now and claim rights you abandoned." "She's my daughter. I have legal rights." "Rights you actively refused for 9 months. Marcus spoke quietly, but there was iron underneath. "Julia tried to contact you. Multiple times. You responded by threatening legal action if she kept reaching out." Kyle's eyes narrowed. "And who are you to speak for her? You her lawyer? Her new boyfriend? Some random guy she found to play daddy?" The accusation stung because it was close enough to the truth to hurt. Marcus wasn't Emma's father. He had no legal standing, no claim to the situation beyond the strange bond that had formed between two broken people trying to put themselves back together. But he stood his ground anyway. "I'm someone who was here, who showed up when she needed help, who didn't abandon her when things got difficult." Marcus took a breath, keeping his voice steady. "You can't disappear for 9 months and then waltz in demanding to be called father. Fatherhood isn't biology. It's showing up every day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Kyle's face flushed red. "You have no right to lecture me about being a father. You don't know anything about me. I know you walked away from someone who needed you. I know you chose the easy path when she was choosing to be brave. That tells me everything I need to know." Security arrived then, 2 large men in uniforms who positioned themselves on either side of Kyle. The nurse who'd tried to stop him earlier spoke with authority that brooked no argument. "Sir, you need to leave now. Hospital policy requires prior approval for visitors in recovery rooms. If you want to be involved in your child's life, you can do that through proper legal channels. But right now, you're violating patient privacy and causing distress. Leave, or we'll have you removed." Kyle looked at Julia, at Marcus, at the security guards. Whatever he'd expected from this confrontation, it wasn't this. He stepped back, hands raised in mock surrender. "Fine, but this isn't over. I want a paternity test, custody arrangements, the whole thing. You can't keep me from my daughter." "I never wanted to keep you from her. You kept yourself away." Julia's voice was stronger now, fueled by anger that overrode exhaustion. "But if you think you can just show up whenever it's convenient and play father, you're wrong. Emma deserves someone who wants her all the time, not just when it suits your conscience." Kyle left, flanked by security, his exit nowhere near as dramatic as his entrance. The nurse apologized profusely, promising to flag Julia's room to prevent future unauthorized visits. Then she left, closing the door softly behind her. The silence that followed was heavy. Julia's hands were shaking, her face still pale. Marcus moved back to the bedside and, without thinking, reached for her hand. "Are you okay?" "No. Yes. I don't know." Julia's voice broke. "What if he's serious? What if he tries to take her?" "Then you fight. You document everything, you get a lawyer, you show that you've been the one preparing for her, caring about her, making sure she has what she needs." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. and you won't be alone in that fight."
Julia looked up at him, tears streaming freely now.
"Why are you doing this? Really? You could walk away right now, and no one would blame you. This isn't your mess to clean up."
Marcus thought about the question he'd been asking himself for weeks, the one he'd been avoiding because the answer terrified him. He thought about Sarah, about the promise he'd made to move on, about Isaiah's drawing with 3 figures, about Julia's hand in his during labor, about the way Emma had looked, wrapped in her hospital blanket. Because when Sarah died, I learned that love isn't finite. Loving her didn't use up all my capacity to care about other people. And somewhere between that coffee shop and tonight, I started caring about you and Emma in ways that scare me but feel right anyway. He paused, choosing words carefully. I'm not trying to replace Kyle, or pretend to be something I'm not.
But I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere unless you ask me to leave. Julia's tears fell harder.
"What if I can't do this? What if I'm not strong enough?"
You just gave birth alone, except for someone you barely know, and then stood up to a man who tried to intimidate you into giving him access he hasn't earned. You're plenty strong. Marcus kept his voice gentle. Asking for help isn't weakness. It's wisdom. Before Julia could respond, the nurse returned with Emma, now cleaned and swaddled in a pink blanket. She placed the baby in Julia's arms, and the whole world seemed to narrow to that single point of contact. Emma's eyes were open now, dark and unfocused, searching her mother's face with the instinct that connected them before birth. Julia touched her daughter's cheek with one finger, and Emma turned toward the touch, mouth opening in that universal gesture of hunger and trust. The nurse helped Julia position Emma to feed, offering guidance with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this thousands of times. Marcus looked away, giving them privacy, but Julia's voice stopped him. "Stay, please. I don't want to be alone right now." So he stayed, sitting in the chair by the window as dawn broke over the city, as Julia fed her daughter for the first time, as the reality of motherhood settled over her like a mantle she'd tried on and found fit better than expected. When Emma fell asleep at Julia's breast, milk drunk and content, the nurse took her to the nursery for monitoring, promising to return her in a few hours. Julia sagged back against the pillows, exhausted beyond words. "You should sleep." Marcus stood, preparing to leave. "I'll check on you later." "Marcus, wait." Julia's eyes were heavy but determined. "I need you to understand something. What you did tonight, what you've been doing since we met, it matters more than I can explain, but I'm terrified of depending on you, of Emma growing up seeing you as her father when you're not, of building a life that includes you and then having it fall apart like everything else has fallen apart." Marcus returned to the bedside, sitting on the edge of the chair. "I understand that fear. When Sarah died, I swore I'd never let anyone close enough to hurt me like that again. For 3 years, I've kept that promise. Then I met you, and suddenly all those walls I built feel like they're made of paper instead of stone."
"What are we doing?"
Julia's question was a whisper, barely audible. "I think we're learning to trust again. Learning that needing someone isn't the same as being weak. Learning that family doesn't always look like we expected it to look." Marcus met her eyes. "I don't have all the answers, Julia, but I know that what I feel for you isn't pity or obligation. It's real, even if I can't name it yet." Julia reached for his hand and he took it, their fingers interlacing with the ease of repetition. "I don't want this to be temporary. I don't want you to wake up one day and realize you made a mistake getting involved with someone else's mess. You're not a mess. You're a person navigating impossible circumstances with more grace than you give yourself credit for." Marcus paused, weighing his next words carefully. But you need to hear something, and I need you to really listen. Are you ready? Julia nodded, her grip tightening on his hand. You deserve to be chosen. Not out of pity or obligation or because you need help. You deserve someone who sees all of you, the strength and the fear and the messy parts, and chooses to stay anyway. Marcus held her gaze. I'm choosing to stay. Not because Emma needs a father or because you need help. Because I want to be here. Because you matter to me in ways I didn't think were possible anymore. The words hung in the air between them, too big and too honest to take back. Julia's face crumpled, and she pulled him closer, her forehead resting against his shoulder as she cried tears that seemed to release something she'd been holding for months. Marcus let her cry, one hand gentle on her back, murmuring reassurances that didn't solve anything, but somehow made the burden lighter. When she finally pulled away, her eyes were red but clear. Something settled in her expression that hadn't been there before. I want this to be real. I want you in our lives, in Emma's life. But I need time to figure out what that looks like. Can you give me that? All the time you need. Julia smiled, watery but genuine. Thank you. For tonight. For everything. For being exactly who Emma and I needed when we didn't know we needed anyone. Marcus stood, pressing a kiss to her forehead that felt both natural and momentous. Get some sleep. I'll be back this afternoon. The drive home happened in a fog of exhaustion and emotions too complex to untangle. The city was waking up, early morning commuters starting their days with no idea that Marcus's entire world had shifted on its axis in a hospital room while they slept. His mother was on the couch when he arrived home, knitting something that had grown considerably overnight. She looked up, questions in her eyes that didn't need voicing. Mother and baby are healthy. It was intense. I imagine it was. His mother set down her knitting. How are you? Marcus sank into the chair across from her, suddenly feeling every hour of lost sleep. I'm not sure. Confused, terrified, hopeful in ways that scare me. You're falling in love with her. It wasn't a question, but Marcus answered anyway. I think I already did. Somewhere between the coffee shop and last night. I just didn't want to admit it. His mother smiled, the knowing smile of someone who'd predicted this outcome from the beginning. Sarah would be happy for you. She'd like Julia, I think. The strength underneath the fear. The determination to do right by her child. That's who Sarah was, too. The comparison made something ache in Marcus's chest. I feel like I'm betraying her. Like moving on means Sarah didn't matter. Marcus, look at me. His mother's voice carried the authority of decades. Sarah mattered. She will always matter. But she's gone, and you're still here. And so is that beautiful boy asleep in the next room who deserves to see his father happy. Sarah knew that. That's why she made me promise. Isaiah appeared in the doorway, hair sticking up in all directions, dinosaur pajamas wrinkled from sleep. Is the baby here? Can we go see her? Marcus held out his arms, and Isaiah climbed into his lap with the easy trust of childhood. The baby's here. Her name is Emma, and she's perfect. We can visit later, after Miss Julia gets some rest. Is Miss Julia your girlfriend now? The question was so direct, so innocent, that Marcus found himself laughing despite his exhaustion. It's complicated, buddy. That's what adults always say when they don't want to answer, Isaiah yawned. But I think she is, and I think that's good. You smile when you text her. Marcus hugged his son closer, breathing in the scent of sleep and strawberry shampoo. You're too smart for your own good.
Grandma says I get it from you. They stayed like that for a long moment, father and son in a chair that had held them through grief and healing, while Marcus's mother watched with satisfaction, and dawn light filtered through the windows. Around noon, after Marcus had showered and slept for a few hours and convinced Isaiah that yes, they really would visit the hospital later, his phone rang. Julia's number. "Hey, everything okay?" Julia's voice sounded stronger than it had hours ago, though still exhausted. "Emma's perfect.
They're doing all the newborn tests, and she's passing everything. Dr. Patterson says we can probably go home tomorrow if nothing changes." "That's great news." "Marcus, about what you said this morning, about choosing to stay." Julia paused. "I need you to be sure, really sure. Because if you're here and then you leave, it'll break something in me I don't think I can fix. And Emma deserves stability, not another person who disappears." Marcus thought about his answer, wanting to get it right. "I can't promise nothing will ever go wrong, or that we won't face challenges. But I can promise that I won't walk away when things get hard. I've learned what that kind of loss does, and I won't inflict it on someone else. I'm sure, Julia. As sure as I can be about anything." The relief in her voice was palpable. "Okay, good. Because I'm falling for you too, and it terrifies me, but I don't want to stop." Something warm bloomed in Marcus's chest, hope tinged with fear, but hope nonetheless.
"Isaiah wants to meet Emma. Would that be okay? Or is it too soon?"
"Bring him. I want Emma to know the people who are going to be part of her life." Julia's voice softened. "I want her to know Isaiah, and I want to see you." They visited that afternoon, Isaiah carrying a drawing he'd made that morning of a baby surrounded by stars. Emma was sleeping when they arrived, tiny and perfect in her bassinet, oblivious to the people gathering around to protect her. Isaiah approached slowly, his usual energy muted by the solemnity of the moment. He looked at Emma with wide eyes, then up at Marcus with wonder. "She's so small. Was I that small?" "You were. Just as perfect, just as new." Isaiah turned to Julia, who was watching from the bed with exhausted affection. "Miss Julia, you did a really good job. She's the prettiest baby I ever saw." Julia laughed, the sound lighter than Marcus had heard from her. "Thank you, Isaiah. That means a lot. Can I hold her? I'll be super careful."
Marcus helped position Isaiah in the chair, showed him how to support Emma's head, then gently placed the sleeping baby in his son's arms. Isaiah went perfectly still, his face a study in concentration and awe. "Hi, Emma. I'm Isaiah. I'm going to be your friend, and I'll teach you all the best stuff, like how to find good rocks and which trees are best for climbing when you're bigger." He paused, then added with the seriousness only a 6-year-old could muster. "And I'll protect you from bullies. That's what big kids do." Marcus's throat tightened. He glanced at Julia and found her crying silently, her hand pressed to her mouth. Their eyes met across the room, and in that moment, everything they'd been dancing around became clear and simple and terrifying and right. This was family. Not the kind they'd planned or expected, but the kind they were building from broken pieces and brave choices and the willingness to risk pain for the possibility of joy. Emma stirred in Isaiah's arms, making small sounds that weren't quite cries. Isaiah looked up, panicked. "Is she okay? Did I hurt her?" Julia reached out. "She's perfect. She's just waking up. You can give her to me." Marcus helped transfer Emma back to her mother, watched Julia cradle her daughter with the confidence that came from hours of practice. Emma's eyes opened, dark and searching, finding her mother's face and settling there with contentment. The afternoon passed in comfortable quiet, Isaiah drawing pictures for Emma, while Marcus and Julia talked in low voices about practical things, like when she'd be discharged, and whether she needed anything for home, and how they'd manage the first weeks. Underneath the practical conversation ran a current of something deeper, unspoken promises about showing up and staying and building something that hadn't existed a month ago. As they prepared to leave, Isaiah hugged Julia carefully, mindful of her soreness.
We'll come back tomorrow, right, Dad? If Miss Julia wants visitors. Julia smiled. I always want visitors, especially you two. In the hallway, walking toward the elevator, Isaiah slipped his hand into Marcus's. Dad, I really like Miss Julia and Emma. Can they be part of our family? Marcus stopped walking, knelt down to meet his son's eyes. Would you want that? Really? Yeah. I know Mom isn't coming back, and that's sad, and I still miss her. But Miss Julia is nice, and Emma needs people to love her, and we have lots of love, right? Enough for more people? The wisdom of it, the simple clarity of a child who understood that love multiplied instead of divided, made Marcus's eyes sting. Yeah, buddy. We have enough love. More than enough. Isaiah hugged him fiercely. Good, because I already love them. Is that okay? That's more than okay. That's perfect. They drove home through the city streets, Isaiah chattering about Emma and all the things he'd teach her when she was older, while Marcus navigated traffic and thought about the strange path that had led them here. A disastrous blind date, a coffee shop confrontation, late-night texts and doctor's appointments, and a birth he'd never expected to witness. All of it adding up to something that felt like grace, like second chances, like the universe offering redemption to people who'd been brave enough to show up when showing up was the hardest thing they could do. Julia and Emma came home from the hospital on Saturday afternoon. Marcus helped carry bags and install the car seat Julia's aunt had grudgingly provided, then followed her to the apartment complex he'd only seen once before. Julia's place was small but neat, the nursery half prepared with a crib and changing table, but not much else. I kept putting off finishing it. Every time I tried, I'd get overwhelmed and stop. Julia set Emma's carrier on the couch. Now I'm home with a baby and half the things I need. Make a list. We'll figure it out. Over the next week, figuring it out became a way of life. Marcus would stop by after work with supplies Julia needed, would hold Emma while Julia showered or napped or just breathed without a baby in her arms. Isaiah came too, appointed himself Emma's official protector, would sit beside her bassinet and read picture books in his halting 6-year-old voice. Kyle called twice, demanding to see Emma, threatening legal action. Julia documented everything, contacted a lawyer, built a case showing 9 months of absence versus Marcus's consistent presence. The lawyer, a sharp woman in her 50s, looked at the timeline and nodded. He'll have rights eventually. Biology matters in court. But you have documentation of abandonment, proof of his threats when you tried to involve him, evidence of another stable adult in the child's life. That will count for something. Marcus attended that meeting, sat beside Julia as they planned for a custody battle that seemed inevitable. Afterward, in his car, Julia broke down. I don't want to fight. I just want to raise my daughter in peace. I know, but sometimes peace requires fighting first. Marcus took her hand. And you're not fighting alone. 2 weeks after Emma's birth, Isaiah had another asthma attack, this one bad enough that Marcus had to use the nebulizer at 2 a.m. and seriously consider the emergency room. Julia showed up at his apartment at 2:30, still wearing pajamas, Emma strapped to her chest in a carrier. Your mom texted me. How is he? Marcus was too tired and too stressed to question how his mother had Julia's number or why she'd thought to call. Better, breathing easier, but it was scary for a while. Julia moved to Isaiah's room without asking permission, sat beside his bed while Marcus finished the nebulizer treatment. She stayed until Isaiah fell asleep, then helped Marcus clean up the equipment, her movements efficient despite Emma dozing against her chest. Thank you for coming. We're
Where else would I be? You show up for us, we show up for you. That's how this works, right? The simplicity of it, the assumption of mutual support, made something settle in Marcus's chest. Yeah, that's how it works.
A month after Emma's birth, Marcus took Julia and Emma to visit Sarah's grave. It felt important somehow, like introducing the parts of his life that had been separate, letting them exist in the same space. Isaiah placed flowers on his mother's headstone with practiced solemnity. Julia stood back, Emma in her arms, giving father and son privacy for their ritual. When Marcus was ready, he turned to her. I want you to meet Sarah. Properly. Julia approached slowly, looking down at the headstone with respect.
Marcus stood beside her, Isaiah between them, and spoke to the wife he'd lost like she could hear. Sarah, this is Julia and Emma. They're important to us. I think you'd like them. I think you'd be glad we found them, that we're not alone anymore. He paused, throat tight. I hope this is what you meant when you made Mom promise. I hope this is okay. The wind stirred the leaves overhead, a gentle sound that could have been answer or coincidence. Julia's free hand found Marcus's, squeezed gently, and they stood together in the autumn sunshine, two broken families learning to be whole. 3 months after that first coffee shop encounter, Julia asked Marcus the question he'd been waiting for without realizing it. They were at his apartment, Emma asleep in a portable bassinet, Isaiah doing homework at the kitchen table. Julia was folding laundry, a domestic scene so ordinary it felt revolutionary. Marcus, what are we? To each other, I mean. We're more than friends, but we haven't defined it, and I need to know if we're working towards something or if this is just comfortable. Marcus set down the dish he'd been washing, turned to face her fully. I love you. I've been too scared to say it, but I do. I love you, and I love Emma, and I want to be part of your lives in every way you'll let me. Julia's eyes filled. Say it again. He understood what she was asking, the need to hear it repeated, to know it wasn't a slip of the tongue. I love you, Julia. I choose you. I choose Emma. I choose this messy, complicated, beautiful thing we're building together. She crossed the distance between them, Emma still asleep in her arms, and kissed him with the certainty of someone who'd stopped being afraid. I love you too, and I'm ready to stop being scared of what that means. Isaiah looked up from his homework. Finally! I was wondering when you guys would figure it out. They laughed, all the tension breaking, and Marcus pulled both Julia and Emma into an embrace that felt like home, like family, like everything he'd thought he'd lost, finding new form in unexpected places. 18 months later, they stood in a courthouse, Marcus in his best suit, Julia in a simple white dress, Emma toddling between them in a purple outfit that matched the flowers Isaiah held. The judge smiled as he pronounced them married, and when Marcus kissed his wife, their daughter clapped and their son cheered, and somewhere in the space between grief and joy, the past and future, loss and love, they became what they'd always been becoming: a family.